Okay, so questions. There should be at least some. After all, I do agree that Kirchhoff's current law and voltage law are things that all of you know, I guess. But I'm not so sure that Maxwell's method and Norton's method are so well understood or well known to everybody. So if there are no questions there, I can also, of course, move on and ask my own. In Norton's
Yes.
method, y was y0 equal to 1 by r0 by q. Okay, Akash, are you saying something?
So can you, yes, sir. In Thevenin's theorem, so why are we taking that Taylor? Why are we taking the first order Taylor polynomial of the voltage, sir? I was
Okay,
a bit
so
confused about it.
is your question why I am taking the Taylor series at all, or is your question why I'm taking it to the first order?
Yes, sir. The first order, sir. Why not the other
Okay,
higher orders?
that's actually a good question. Okay, so let me just try to understand that in some detail. Wait a minute, let me just start my share my screen first. Everybody can see my screen now. There's nothing on it except for a few very faint windows, but you can see my screen, right?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Okay, and now you can see something which looks like a piece of paper on that. Is this visible? This
Yes, sir.
document?
Yes, sir.
Okay, good. Yeah, I do need confirmation from time to time. I also have to make sure that I'm still connected. So, okay. So, question is, we use the Taylor series. That is, what we did was we had a box. Something was going on inside it. There was some piece of circuitry. It's supposedly a black box. Now, I'm pretty sure all of you know that black box is just a figurative term. It just means something you can't peek into. Or at least for the purpose of this calculation, you are assuming that whatever inside the black box is not known to you. Of course, when you want to theoretically calculate the Thevenin equivalent, you would have to know what's inside the box. But when you're applying the Thevenin theorem, you don't really need to know what is inside the box. All you need to know is that it has an equivalent circuit. Okay. Now, the idea was there's a voltage between these two terminals. So that's something which is accessible from outside. And there's a current which goes into this terminal. Or in the Thevenin theorem, actually, the convention is we take this current, the current going out. By the way, sign conventions can become quite a bit of a pain in many of these things. So you have to be careful about that. For Thevenin's theorem or for one port theorem, Thevenin Norton, what we do is we assume that the current is flowing out through the terminal which is marked plus. Of course, when you mark this terminal plus, it does not mean that this voltage is necessarily higher than the other voltage. All it means is that if this voltage here is higher than the voltage here, the voltage V is going to be positive. If this voltage is lower than this voltage, which is possible, then V will turn out to be negative. So it's just a sign convention. Similarly, when you assume that the current is flowing this way, you are just establishing a positive direction for the current. If I works out to be positive, it's flowing that way. If I is negative, it is actually flowing the other way. Now, the reason why I'm stressing this is that later on you will see two-port networks, for example, which are going to play quite an important role in the discussion. And there, the sign convention is opposite, the standard sign convention. That is, the current actually flows in instead of flowing out. So you have to be very careful about which sign convention is being where. Since these are traditional sign conventions and they have some reasons behind them, we don't really change the standard conventions just to suit us. So we will stick to the standard conventions, but you have to be very careful about what those conventions are. Okay. So having said that, what is pretty straightforward is a statement that V is a function of I. Okay. Now what we did is we wrote that as V of 0 plus I into dV di at I equal to 0 plus higher order terms. The question that was asked is, in the actual statement of the Thevenin theorem, we dropped these terms. We just took up to this. The question is, how can we do that? I guess that was the question, right? If I'm not got it wrong.
Yes.
Okay. One point would be, for if you don't know what is inside the black box, if the black box is completely unknown to you, then you don't really know what is going on inside. You don't know this function. All you can do is measure stuff from outside, measure V as a function of I, and make statements about that. Of course, if you really want to completely replicate what the black box does, what you should really do is measure I or control I and measure V for different i's and get some kind of a curve which describes the V versus I thing. Okay? So that kind of thing is actually called a characteristic curve. Why? So if you measure V versus I and draw the curve, you know exactly what voltage is going to come out at what current. However, as you will see very often in this course, dealing with the complete characteristic curve for any black box or any device becomes too complicated most of the time, unless you have access to a high-end computer. So if you have a nice computer at your disposal which can do very fast calculations, then using the actual function V of I may be useful. However, in most cases, you would be expected to understand the features. Now, just doing a high-end computation does not always tell you what is actually going on. It gives you the right numbers, but you may lose understanding in the process. So very often, as I stressed in the very first class, in physics, in all of physics, but especially in electronics, what you do is you resort to approximate models. So one thing you could very well say is that I know that there may be higher order terms, but I typically expect those higher order terms to be small. So I will ignore those higher order terms for the time being, start with this as a starting assumption. So that is one level of. So at one level, Thevenin's theorem, stopping at the first order term, basically is an approximation which is a controlled approximation in the sense that we know that we are ignoring terms of order I square. So we know that if current is very, very huge, then those other terms may very well come in and complicate my calculation. So then if the current becomes very huge, then I will have to abandon this result and go in for higher order corrections. But in most cases, we would expect the higher order correction to be small. Now, there is another reason why Thevenin's theorem actually stops here, which is this. Many circuit components that we use are actually linear components. Linear meaning the voltage and the current have a linear relationship. You double the voltage, the current doubles. Now, of course, the most obvious of them, these things, is a resistance, because what I said right now is nothing but Ohm's law, right? To double voltage, resistance, current gets doubled for a given resistance. Or if you replace V by V1 plus V2, the current becomes I1 plus I2, where I1 is of course V1 by R and I2 is V2 by R. So that happens for resistance. The response of a capacitor or an inductor to an impulse voltage is slightly more complicated. The capacitor voltage, of course, depends on the charge inside. So not on the current, but on the integral of the current. An inductor's EMF depends not on the current, but actually the rate at which the current changes. But all of these are linear operations. Okay? So if you were to double the current, the voltage would get doubled. If you were to replace I by I1 plus I2, it will become V1 plus V2. So if you have a linear device, if all the things inside the black box are linear, that is made out of resistances, capacitances, and inductances, then it's pretty easy to see that there will be no higher order terms at all. Okay. For linear devices, stopping at first order is exact. So there you have no approximation whatsoever. However, I would really want to emphasize that first of all, in electronics, we deal with nonlinear devices all the time. The interesting things are actually nonlinear. Things like diodes, transistors, etc. have nonlinear responses. The voltage current curve is not really a straight line. So for such devices, stopping at first order is an approximation. It is just expected to be a decent approximation unless the current is too huge. If your circuit is composed only of resistors, capacitors, inductors, ideal resistors, ideal capacitors, ideal inductors, I should say, and voltage sources, then stopping at first order would be exact. Then Thevenin's theorem would be an exact result. If your black box contains nonlinear devices, it's an approximate result. Okay. So at the very beginning, I emphasized that in electronics, you have to do controlled approximations. Basically, because if you don't do this, the calculations become way too difficult. Okay. So does that answer your question?
Yes, sir. Sir, but let's assume that we only have one port of the black box. So let's assume that the two ports are actually high current ports. So, sir, in that case, Thevenin's theorem basically fails right from the onset.
When you say two ports, I don't understand.
Sir, let's assume that the black box is a high current generating circuit.
Yeah.
And
so if it's a high current generating circuit, so first of all, it's a one port theorem such as one port theorems. Remember, the port is an artificial concept that you have a real circuit. Okay. You decide to say that, okay, yes, I will only access this one port. That is a pair of terminals. Everything else I'm going to put inside my black box. That's your decision, right? It's not as if the system really comes locked into a black box. Okay. That's one thing. The other thing is, if your circuit produces a high amount of current, okay, then this may very well be a bad approximation. Then these terms may need to be taken into account. 2 points there. First of all, most electronic circuits don't really produce very high amount of current. We are going to come to that. But even apart from that, even at reasonably high currents produced by electronic circuits, the nonlinear effects may become important. And if it does, then you have to go beyond Thevenin's theorem. Okay? In fact, that is precisely why, if you want very precise calculations of circuit parameters, you would actually resort to a computer calculation, because you will have highly noisy equations to solve, which becomes very difficult to handle. But the real advantage of Thevenin's theorem is this. In most situations, Thevenin's theorem works very well. As I said, with resistors, inductors, capacitors, it works perfectly fine. With nonlinear devices, which is what we are going to use it for often later on, it doesn't work perfectly, but it works reasonably well. Now, reasonably well is often better than perfectly for one reason. One very important reason is that this result, as the theorem goes, it doesn't stop here. It just says, okay, this thing, V0 we can call V Thevenin, that's the name, and you write this quantity as minus R Thevenin, and you get this result. So the voltage delivered here is actually given by a voltage, pure voltage V Thevenin, from which you are subtracting a term R Thevenin I. Now this is exactly what you would get if you had a voltage source V Thevenin in series with an R Thevenin. Right? Because V Thevenin would be the voltage produced by the source, but when current I is drawn out from it, you get an R Thevenin times I drop across the resistance. So what you see here is actually V Thevenin minus R Thevenin I. Okay. Now, the hugely important point here is you can now replace your calculation. You had a, remember you started with a function of I, which could be a very complicated one. Taylor series and using Taylor series and stopping at the first term gives a simpler equation. Okay. Much simpler than having highly complicated nonlinear terms here. The huge advantage is that you don't stop at this equation stage, you replace this with an equivalent circuit. And then you can use all that we have learned about equivalent circuits to actually help in doing these calculations. Okay. So then you can use standard circuit analysis, including even simple series parallel connections that you have learned, say, from class 10 onwards. Okay. And that, the advantage is that gives you an insight, that tells you, gives an understanding of how the circuit will work. If you just are able to calculate the results using a computer program, for example, you will get some numerical values at the end, but you will not really understand what's going on. For numerical understanding, for actual physical understanding, this kind of equivalent circuit is very, very important. That's the real importance. You can understand what's going on, and then, of course, if it doesn't fit exactly, you can then fall back and look at your extra terms which you ignored and try to take them into account term by term. Now, the important issue here is this is exactly how all of physics is done. Not by replacing things by equivalent circuits, but by replacing very, very complicated things by simpler models, understanding those models precisely. That gives you a way of understanding what's going on. And once you have understood that, what you can do is you can actually then see whether it fits your reality perfectly. If it does, fine. If it doesn't, you actually have to go in for higher order corrections. But there you at least have an understanding of what's going on to build upon. This is exactly what we do in electronics. In electronics, we have to do it even for elementary, say, DS level courses. The point is, in most other courses, this kind of thing has been done so well, and there you have found out some problems where you don't really need to approximate this badly, and you only teach those first. In electronics, you have to learn to do this from the very beginning. But this, let me assure you, is exactly what is done everywhere. Has to be done everywhere. This is how science progresses. Okay. For us, this is how we do elementary calculations anyway. Okay. Is that enough of an explanation for this?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so there are some few questions I can see. Soham has asked a question about Norden's method. Arikta Shah has asked why max power is delivered when RS equals R Thevenin. Okay, so let's answer the second question first, simply because it pertains to the Thevenin theorem. So, but I'm assuming that people have actually watched the Thevenin theorem video that came out later. But anyway, let's just say that this is what the scenario is. You have a and you're connecting a source resistance from outside. Let's call that RL, a load resistance. Okay. So basically, you had this thing within your black box, some complicated circuit which you don't really care much about. Thevenin's theorem guarantees you that at least in the linear approximation, it is going to be equivalent to a voltage source in series with the resistance. And then you can ask how much is the current drawn by any external circuit. Remember, whatever you connect to the port from the outside, that is what you have control over. You can measure the voltage there, you can connect a voltmeter there to measure the voltage, you can put an ammeter there to measure the current, you can put various resistances or some complicated circuitry, whatever, but you can only connect between on these two ports. Okay, my dashed lines are actually slightly wrong because the dashed lines should really go like this. Whatever is within the dashed line is inside the black box. The ports are actually outside. They are accessible to you. Okay, so now I'm pretty sure in the lecture I just said that the maximum power is delivered to RL max power delivered to it if R Thevenin equals RL. Or in other words, it's actually RL which you can vary. So you have to adjust your RL until RL becomes exactly equal to R Thevenin, then you get maximum power. That was the result. I don't think I gave an explanation. I don't remember. This video was made a year ago, so I don't exactly remember whether I gave an explanation there or not. I'm assuming from the question that I did not. Okay. Now, the reason why I did not give the explanation was because I thought that this was a very, very familiar result from your higher secondary days, which you may have forgotten. But even in your higher secondary days, you must have had this problem. R1, some source E, R2, and the question was under what condition is maximum power delivered to R2? The answer is when R2 equals R1. Here, typically, R1 was considered to be the internal resistance of battery and E was the EMF. But basically the same maths. So just in case people have missed that, the current I to R2 is simply that remember is the advantage of Thevenin's theorem. Now that you have replaced your complicated piece of circuitry inside by just a voltage source and a series resistance, you can just use elementary circuit analysis to tell you what the current will be. And then what will be the power? Power will be E square by R1 plus R2 whole square to R2. Right? And the question is, when will this power be maximum? Right? So what all you have to do is, the simplest thing to do, or at least the most obvious thing to do perhaps, would be to and then work out the result. Now this I thought was a very standard result. The maximum power delivery theorem was something which is standard in most higher secondary courses. So I assume that people already know this. That dPdR2 equal to 0 will actually give you R2 equal to R1. That's the maximum. That is again something you can easily check by looking at the second derivative if you want. But there are easier ways of checking this just from the algebra. Or you could even take a look at this, R1 plus R2 by R2. Take a look at this ratio and ask when is this minimum, right? Because the reciprocal of this is actually what goes in the formula for the power. And then you have something like this. Okay, then you should be able, okay, after this you should be able to use plain algebra, not even calculus, to find out the answer. I will not tell you how, but I will just ask you to work on it. So use task, use algebra to minimize. So does this answer your question, Richter? Okay, great. Now, I'm a bit surprised that there are no questions from Maxwell's method or Norden's method. Or there was one, but okay, okay, in Norden's method, y was y0 equal to 1 by r0, assumed. Okay, that was. So basically, The point is in Maxwell's method, we assume that you only have voltage sources, you don't have current sources. Okay. Why do you do that? I'm just talking about Maxwell's method as well at the same time. Simply because if you have, say, some nodes like this, with resistors, you can imagine resistors, etc., in the various branches. You're assuming I1, I2, I3 various currents, and you're writing down essentially Kirchhoff's voltage law using this, right? If you go through the way in which this was justified, what you always need is to know how much is the voltage drop across every component. So either because if it's a voltage source, then you already know how much the voltage drop is. So it will be the value of the voltage source. Or if it's a resistance, you know how much the voltage drop would be simply from Ohm's law, right? However, the problem with having a current source in, say, a circuit like this would be simply this. A current source can deliver a fixed amount of current. I'm talking about an ideal current source. It delivers a fixed amount of current, but the voltage across it can be anything which is controlled by the external circuit, whatever it is connected to. So just from the fact that you are crossing a current source, you will have no clue about what the voltage drop across it will be. Okay. So you cannot write down the Kirchhoff voltage law equations if you have a current source in your circuit. Okay. Similarly, for Norton's method, what you're doing is you are identifying various nodes and giving them some voltages. And then you are saying, okay, the net current flowing out of every node will be zero. That's how you write down your Norton nodal equations. Okay, that's fine. That can be done easily, except for this point. If you have a voltage source in your circuit, that messes things up. Because if you have a voltage source, then you cannot say beforehand how much current will flow through it. Just like for a current source, it's only the current which is fixed. The voltage across it could be arbitrary. Am I still connected? Hello?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I think that, yeah, you can still see my presentation. I just saw a big blink on my screen. Anyway, I hope all of you heard this much, right? So for Norton's method, what you need to know is you have labeled the voltage at every node, and you are trying to write down equations for the net current flowing through those nodes. If you have a current source, you know how much the current will be because the current source tells you how much current is there. If you have a resistance, you have the voltage across the resistance in both ends. From that, you can find out how much the current will be using Ohm's law. That much is straightforward. But if you have a voltage source, the problem is you don't know beforehand how much current will flow through the voltage source. Okay? So just like having a current source in Maxwell's method messes things up, you cannot directly write down an equation like that. Having a voltage source in the Norton's method also messes things up. Okay? Which is why you have to replace the voltage source by an equivalent current source. So basically the idea is if you have a voltage source in series with some resistance, so let's say V0 in series with R0, you want to replace it by an equivalent current source. Now, one of the first things you need to understand is this. Why is it that voltage sources come with a series resistance? And why is it that current sources come with a parallel impedance? It's really very simple. The whole idea is that no source is really perfect. A perfect voltage source would deliver V0 voltage no matter what current is flowing through it. Okay? But a real source is not perfect. It cannot deliver the voltage. And when I say real source, I mean this whole thing. That's the real source. Okay. A voltage source always comes with a series resistance simply because no voltage source is perfect. You've already learned about this in your higher secondary days, at least. You learned about internal resistance of a battery. The basic idea simply is that no power source in the world actually give you exactly precisely the same voltage no matter what the current is. If you draw more current, the output voltage will typically be smaller. This, by the way, is exactly Thevenin's theorem. So what you learned about as an internal resistance of a battery in class 11 was a very elementary application of Thevenin's theorem. Okay. Remember that what goes on inside a battery is a very complicated thing. A lot of complicated chemistry goes on inside. But all that can be replaced by virtue of Thevenin's theorem by a voltage source in series with a resistance. And there, for a battery, instead of calling it VThevenin, you called it the EMF of the battery. And instead of calling the resistance R Thevenin, you called it the internal resistance of the battery. But frankly, that was exactly Thevenin's theorem applied to a battery. Okay, a real battery. Very similarly, so this is something which is familiar to all of you. What may be less familiar is current sources, because current sources are things which we don't deal with very often, at least in elementary classes. So there is a reason for that. I will come to that soon. But a current source, an ideal current source, would keep on delivering the same current no matter what load you connect to it. Okay. So whether you connect 1 kilo ohms or 100 kilo ohms, you should deliver the same current. If it's greater than 1 milliampere, it should keep on delivering 1 milliampere. So that's the ideal case. In reality, that's not what happens. In reality, what happens is if you connect a larger resistance, the current source does not manage to deliver the full current that is rated at, but a smaller current. Okay. Now you might say large resistance, small current was the big deal. That's what is supposed to be, because that's what Ohm's law tells you. But that will be wrong, because Ohm's law does not tell you that large resistance leads to small current. It tells you large resistance would lead to small current if the voltage were fixed. Here the current source tries to keep the current fixed. What that would mean is, if you had an ideal current source of say 1 milliampere, if you connected 1 kilo ohm across it, the voltage drop would have been 1 volt. And you would get 1 milliampere flowing to the 1 kilo. If you had connected 10 kilo ohms, the voltage drop should have become 10 volts. But the current would still be 1 milliampere. That is the ideal case. But in reality, what happens is, if you increase the resistance, the voltage drop increases, the current tries to stay at the same level, but it can't. It really becomes slightly smaller. So how do you model that? You model that by this. By saying that whatever load resistance you connect, apart from that, there is a impedance, or there is an admittance connected in parallel across the ideal current source. So what does that do? That ensures that the moment the voltage in the output tries to go up, simply because you're driving bigger current through the resistance, same current through a bigger resistance, let's say. So this voltage goes up, but then some of the voltage also causes current to flow through the internal admittance. So the internal admittance takes away some of the current. Okay. Just like if you were to try to deliver bigger currents using a voltage source, the internal resistance would drop some more voltage, so the output voltage will go down. Here, you try to drive a bigger voltage using a current source, because you're using a bigger resistance. That internal admittance will take away some current. Okay. So now, next question is, so the point is, this is what a real voltage source looks like. This is what a real current source looks like. Yeah, go ahead.
So why we need to take a small current due to impedance? I mean,
sorry, I didn't get you.
Why we need in the current source? Why we need to take the current to the impedance? I mean, if there is no such impedance, then all current will go through the external.
If there is no such impedance, then all the current will go to the output, right? So why do we need to take that impedance? Is that your question?
Yeah,
It's
yes.
usually we talk of an admittance there, not an impedance. It's just a reciprocal of an impedance.
Yes.
But it's the same thing. What you're saying, are you saying this? That is, suppose, okay, that's a bad picture. Current source is typically drawn perhaps like this. So this is your current source I0. Just repeat this. If this was your circuit and you're a variable RL, if this current source were perfect, then no matter what RL you connect, the current here would be I0 and your output voltage would simply be I0 times RL. So increase RL, V increases, I0 stays the same. Okay, that's what a current source is supposed to do. What you have is this. You have an additional admittance YO connected across it. Okay, you can call it an admittance. You can, of course, use this reciprocal and call it a resistance. Admittance makes life easier for the calculation, so we are going to stick to admittance here. So is your question, why do we have the admittance at all? Because not having it will be better, right?
Yes,
That's what you are
yes,
asking.
yes.
Good.
Yes.
You're right that not having the admittance would have been better. Okay. In other words, ideally, we would expect Y0 to be 0. Y0 again, remember, is admittance, which means no. If you have no connection here, that's actually infinite resistance or 0 admittance. Okay. If you think in terms of resistance, that would be infinite. In terms of admittance, it's 0. That would be the ideal case. If you did not have it, life would be wonderful. Unfortunately, life is not wonderful. It is not in all aspects. Real sources are real sources. You cannot do much about that. If you would have loved to have an ideal source of current, which manages to deliver the same current no matter what resistance you connect across it, simply by adjusting the voltage in proportion. In real life, that simply doesn't happen. Sorry, that's the way the real world goes. Okay. So it's not that we are putting Y0 here because we want to make the current source work badly. It may be if in ideal world, we could have an I0 and then we could connect a Y0 just to make it work not as well. But in the real world, that's not how things go. In real world, the point is every source is non-ideal. So every source has to behave this way that if you try to drive too much current, too much voltage by using the current source with a very huge resistance, you will actually drop some of the current. Unfortunately, that can't be helped. That's the way the world is. Okay. So there's a distinction between the ideal world and the real world. Yeah, what? The physical reason. The physical reason simply would be that the internal circuitry of your. The physical reason, of course, depends on the internal circuitry of your current source, but the physical reason would ultimately always boil down to this: the current source is parts. Okay, and in order to make it work, current has to flow through different parts. If you make the output voltage huge, that would actually make the currents flowing through the internal parts also larger, and somehow these currents will actually take away from divert the current away from the output and put it inside. That's it. If you could create an ideal current source, and in fact you can come pretty close to an ideal current source. You can't create an exactly ideal current source in real life, but you can come pretty close to it. And if you really came pretty close to it, then you could, that's the approximation that we use often. We often approximate our current sources with ideal current sources. Frankly, you have done this over and over again when you have written down just a battery without any internal resistance in a circuit. In fact, I've done that in the problems myself. Okay. That is the approximation where you have approximated a real voltage source with an ideal voltage source, a voltage source which doesn't have an internal resistance. This is exactly the same level of approximation. Look, the important idea is real sources always have internal resistances. Real current sources always have internal admittances. You cannot do away with that. However, what makes a source a good current source? Remember, Thevenin's theorem ultimately always tells you this. If you have whatever in your black box, okay, and a pair of terminals stick out from that, then whatever is in here will ultimately look like this. At least as long as the currents delivered are not too high, that is not so high that the nonlinear effects are going to take over. This is always going to look like this. So you might say everything, as long as everything with a pair of terminals sticking out, would be like a voltage source. Okay? Or, well, equivalently, there's Norton's theorem, which is also very much there, says that everything is equivalent to, the current source, which you call the Norton current, and in parallel with an admittance called the Norton impedance. And these two are equivalent circuits for whatever is in the black box. Both are equally good equivalent circuits. Okay? So you might very well ask yourselves the question, then why don't we say everything is a voltage source? After all, Thevenin's theorem does say this is a voltage source. Norton's theorem does say that this is a current source. Now you don't go about saying, calling every circuit a voltage source or a current source, right? When you say voltage source, you typically mean some batteries or some device which is supposed to produce a voltage. Maybe you have not met current sources yet, but you will when you get to the lab. Current sources are less common in daily life, but these two theorems actually seem to tell you that everything is a voltage source, everything is a current source. Then why is it that we only specifically talk about certain things as voltage sources or current sources? To understand that, you have to realize that an ideal voltage source would simply be something like this. Right? No series resistance. And an ideal current source would be something like this. No parallel impedance. Okay? Now, in reality, you don't have this. In reality, you have a series resistance and you have a parallel admittance for a current source. Now, when do you call something a good voltage source then? An ideal voltage source would be for R0, what? 0 R0. What would be a decent voltage source then? Yes? I'm hoping I'm still connected. Am I?
Yes, sir.
Just tell me
With
that.
negligible or internal resistance.
Okay, could you just repeat that? I think you said the right thing.
The internal resistance should be negligible.
Good. But okay, I'm not going to come back to this, but the point is right. Zero internal resistance would be an ideal, small internal resistance would be a good source. Okay. So the reason why we don't call every circuit with a pair of terminals sticking out a voltage source, despite the fact that Thevenin's theorem really says that it is simply because R Thevenin may be huge. So if R Thevenin is huge, thinking of that as a voltage source almost makes no sense. Got it? So ideal voltage sources should have zero resistances. Real voltage sources, things which we call voltage sources, should have small resistance. Okay. Along the same lines, what about ideal current source? Ideal current source, how much admittance should you have here? Ideal current source means this should be missing. So Y0 for an ideal current source would be how much?
Infinite.
0 or infinite?
0.
0.
Okay, then,
0.
yeah, it should be 0 because we're talking about admittance. Okay. It is infinite, but infinite resistance. When you say Y0, we're talking of admittance, and admittance is zero, meaning what? Meaning no matter how much of a voltage you put across these two, remember whatever voltage you put across these two ends is also the voltage which you put across Y0, right? So if Y0 is zero, it simply means no matter how much voltage you put across it, no current is going to be admitted in. So no current will flow through this, nothing will be diverted from the I0, all the I0 will go to the load. That's the ideal case. So what would you want it to be in reality? Reality is not ideal. So what would you want it to be in reality? If you want to call something a current source, you should have a Y0 off.
Y0 should be small.
Should you have a large Y0 or a small Y0?
Small.
Yeah, a small Y0, right. So a device is called a voltage source if it has a small R0. It's called a current source if it has a small Y0. Unless that happens, calling something a voltage source just because Thevenin's theorem says that it looks like a voltage source would not really be correct. Same goes for current sources. You call something a current source only if it is a small, only if it has a small admittance. Okay, Shobhit Dash has a question.
No, sir, mistakenly the hand was raised.
Okay, you raised the hand by mistake. Fine. Okay, so I hope I have made this point very clear that.
Sir, here I have one more doubt.
Yeah, go ahead.
In the voltage source, we have the internal resistance because of the collision among the electrons. So we have in the series we have the internal resistance and voltage source. Is there similar anything process is happening in the current source also?
There is a very similar process inside the current source as well. The only point is, unless we look at the detailed structure of what is inside the voltage source or the current source, we should not really be in a position to see about this, exactly what is causing this. Okay? And the beauty of having equivalent circuits is you don't really need to worry about the when you actually use an electronic circuit and do a calculation, do you worry about the collisions of electrons inside? Strictly speaking, it's not really collisions of electrons, it's more complicated than that. Collisions of electrons is just a fairy tale you get taught in your high school. Okay, when you go to study, say, solid state physics, you will see that the thing is way more complicated than that. But that fairy tale has its place. That fairy tale actually is a good approximation to what happens. Okay. What really happens is way more complicated. But having a, I'm not using the word fairy tale in a disparaging manner. I'm just saying that at different levels you create models of the world to explain things. Since you did not learn enough about quantum mechanics, even you did not learn anything about quantum mechanics in high school except for a few words, you were in no position to understand exactly what causes resistance. Okay. So later on, when you take a solid state physics course next year, you will learn a lot more about what causes resistance, how to calculate it. In fact, what you would learn actually is something quite the opposite. You would learn how is it that current can at all flow inside a solid. That in itself is actually a miracle of quantum mechanics. If quantum mechanics had not been around, if the world had been classical, even metals would not have conducted. You'll learn about that in solid state physics in great detail. But the point I'm trying to make is, in order to understand what happens, you don't have to know the internals always. But there are internal mechanisms which cause voltage drops inside the source. Similarly, there are internal mechanisms which cause current diversion inside a current source. But the details of that will have to depend on which particular source you're talking about. The important point is the equivalent circuits give you the advantage that you know that ultimately, no matter what is going on inside, a source can be modeled by a voltage source in series with a resistance or a current source in parallel with an admittance. Okay? So the details are important. I'm not saying they're not important, but even without learning all about the details, you can use these equivalent models and they give you perfectly good results. Sometimes those details you have to avoid simply because they're way too complicated to handle right now. Just to give you another example of this from another branch of science, one of the most important subject topics in physics and chemistry in, say, the 19th century, 1800s, was thermodynamics. Why was thermodynamics so useful? Both because of the industrial revolution, we needed to understand engines and machines a lot. That was a practical reason. But other major reason was thermodynamics does not care about what is happening inside. So even with a huge majority of physicists and a small majority of chemists not really believing in atoms, thermodynamics worked perfectly well because you did not have to really worry about what's going on inside. Okay, to apply thermodynamics. That's why thermodynamics was so successful, and that is why even today it's so powerful. Its major conclusions don't depend on what is going on inside. So microscopic physics you didn't have to worry about. At a lesser level, Thevenin and Norton's theorem do the same thing for you. You don't really have to worry about what's going on inside. Okay, having said that, I believe I've still not answered the original question. Soham, are you okay with the explanation, or do you need something else?
Yes, I still didn't understand in the example. Why did you take y naught equals 1 by r naught? I mean, that's my question.
No, that's not what I did in the example. That's what you have to do anyway. Let's see. What you are doing is you are replacing this thing, which is a voltage source, by this thing. Okay. Now, why do you have to do that? First question is, why would you have to do this? The answer is, depends on what your application is, especially if you're using Norton's method, you should not have voltage sources inside for reasons I explained. So you need to replace the voltage source by a current source. In fact, it can go the other way around as well. If you're using Maxwell's method and your circuit has a current source, you would want to replace it by a voltage source. The question is, how do you find the current source which is equivalent to this voltage source and vice versa? Okay. And the idea is straightforward. The idea is, remember, I don't really care what's going on inside. I want to figure out that whatever happens here stays the same. So here, for example, if I were to put a short across this, how much current would flow?
V naught by r naught.
Yes. How much current would flow here if I were to put a short across the output terminal? You should never do that to a real battery, of course, unless you want it to burn up. But in a calculation, you can always do that. Put a wire across the two ends of a battery. Now you're all cooped up at home, so don't try. This is one experiment you should never try. Don't put a wire across two ends of a battery. Unless you want to lose the battery and burn a wire, and perhaps your finger as well. But how much current will flow here? That should be easy. Okay, I see the answer here. Unfortunately, I can't really see the chat box most of the time. So V naught by R naught, right? That's the current which will flow here. If I were to put a short across this, what would the current be?
I naught.
Okay. Am I still connected? I don't think so. Okay, I'm back now. I just lost contact for a moment. But before I lost contact, I heard I naught. So basically, what we are saying is this. In this circuit, if you put a short, you get a current of V naught by R naught. In this circuit, if you put a short, again, not something you should do, but you get a current of I naught simply because if it's a short, all the current will of course flow to the short and nothing will flow to this admittance. Now, if these two are equivalent, if the one is equivalent to the other, then what it means is that if you were to do the same thing to their outputs, you should get the same result. So put a short across both outputs, you should get the same current, so you must have this. So this is the connection between the voltage, this voltage at V naught R naught and this current I naught. Okay. So that's one part of the equivalent circuit done. Why should I naught be V naught by R naught? The answer is this ensures that the same current flows when you have a short across both ends. Remember, if they are really equivalent, then if you do the same thing across the two ends, you should have the same result. Now, what about the why not? How do you find that out? The answer is, if I have an open circuit here, if I don't join anything, how much should the voltage be across this? Okay, I've got one answer. It should be exactly V naught, right? For the simple reason that no current is flowing if it's open. If no current flows, there can be no drop across the R naught. So whatever voltage the source is producing, that voltage comes here. By the way, this can confuse a lot of people if they're meeting this for the first time. No current flowing actually produces the largest output voltage. Larger current produces smaller voltages. That seems to go against Ohm's law, but it doesn't. Okay. If you draw more current here, more will be dropped across R naught, so there is less you will get out in the output. This is something which everybody knows, but from time to time, people get confused between this and Ohm's law. Ohm's law actually says V equal to IR, but there the I is the current flowing through a resistance and R is the resistance, and V is the voltage drop across that resistance. So here, if the current I flows across R0, I times R0 will be a drop across that. Anyway, right now, if it's open, no voltage drops, so the output is V0. On the other hand, if you did the same thing to the current source, the equivalent current source, what would the voltage here be? Now note this current I0, where does it go now? Okay, once again, yeah. So Shaumakandi Shah has the answer for that. Well, if a current I0 flows through a resistance, then the voltage drop across that would be I0 times the resistance. But this is an admittance, something which you have to get used to. And well, the admittance is simply reciprocal of a resistance. So current times resistance would become current by admittance. Okay. So if these two ends were kept open, the voltage across would be I0 by Y0 for the current source case. Again, if they're equivalent, these two should be the same. So Y0 from this should be I0 by V0. That's equal to 1 by R0. So does that answer the original question?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Now, you should still check one thing. I've just used the fact that these two are equivalent. And if they are equivalent, that means no matter what you do to the two ends, you should get the same result, right? So I said, okay, let's put a short. That's an easy case. And that tells us what the current is in both cases and equate them. And then I also say that, okay, if they're really equivalent, doesn't matter what you do, make the two ends open, find the voltage. That's again easy to do, and equate the two. But the question would be, if I put an arbitrary resistance, some R across both, I should get the same result. That is same current flowing through resistance R. Okay, this is something which you should definitely do at home. Check that that actually happens. If you take I0 to be V0 by R0 and Y0 to be 1 by R0, check that the amount of current flowing through in resistance R, which for the voltage source example is trivial, is V0 by R0 plus R, works out to be the same also for the current source case. Okay, that's a good practice because it also gives you some practice in dealing with current sources. Current sources are not that well known or not that common, at least in elementary calculations. But you will need to deal a lot with current sources. They will be very important in electronics. So you need some practice in that. So just check that you actually get the same result for the current, no matter what resistance you connect. We of course did two special cases, one for R equal to 0, which was a short, another for R equal to infinity. And we equated the two and found out the relationship between I0 Y0 and V0 R0. Just show that that relationship actually ensures that you get the same current no matter what resistance you connect. By the way, this is already guaranteed by Thevenin's theorem and Norton's theorem, because you should realize that this is nothing but a Thevenin equivalent of your source, and there is nothing but the Norton equivalent of your source. The theorem says whatever is in the black box is equivalent to a Thevenin equivalent. It's also, the other theorem also says it's equivalent to a Norton equivalent. All you're saying is these two must be then equivalent to each other. Okay, I just have a question for you. When I say equivalent, what does it really mean? For example, if I take a very simple example, if I replace a series resistance, 3 resistances in series by a single resistance and say it's an equivalent, what do I mean by that? The 3 1 kilo ohm resistances is equivalent in series is equivalent to a 3 kilo ohm resistance. What does the word equivalent mean here?
The effect produced by both are
Yeah, voltage drop across the two will be equivalent.
Okay. Anything else?
If you replace
You're
one
partly
with
correct,
the
but it's
other,
actually more. It won't what?
It won't make a difference in the circuit.
Good, but it won't make a difference in the circuit. In what sense? You're right. But let's say I have a circuit where I have this. Okay, let's drawing with my poor drawing skills. Even drawing one resistance is bad, so let's just make it 2 resistances of 3, and then you have other parts of the circuit, some other things, some voltage sources, whatever. But when you say you can replace R1 and R2 in series here by R1 plus R2, and you're saying it will not make any difference to the circuit? That is, you keep the rest of the circuit the same and just replace these 2 resistances by one single resistance. Are you saying it will make absolutely no difference to the circuit, or are you saying something less absolute than that?
The current flow through both of them would be same.
Oh, that's what the series. I'm not really focused on series here. All I'm asking, the series was just an example. All I'm saying is when I say this is equivalent to that. So these 2 resistances together, they happen to be in series. That's why the current flow in them is the same. But if they're in parallel, then the current flow would not be the same. But even then, I could replace them by an equivalent, right?
The voltage current relations should be same.
Where?
Yes, sir. The fundamental relations of how the circuit will behave will be equivalent. but obviously if you change
The
the,
what?
like, instead of two
Look,
resistors, you'll
equivalent
have
is just a
one
word,
resistor.
right?
That would
What
be
does it
the,
mean? I understand that most of you understand the concept, but the precise point that is important here is almost what was said, that the circuit will stay the same, but that's really correct, right? Here, for example, you were having a voltage division, right? The voltage was being divided. One part was coming here, one part was coming here. There is no such voltage division here, right? So it is different. It's not the same. It's just that if you were to replace a part of a circuit by an equivalent, voltages and currents everywhere else in the circuit should stay the same. That is actually a very trivial thing to say, but it's also a very important thing to keep in mind. When you replace something by an equivalent circuit, of course, that part has changed. You have something complicated there, you have replaced it by a single resistance or single impedance, single whatever, single voltage source. So that part has changed. No doubt about that. Okay. When you say things stay the same, you are right, but the important thing is things elsewhere stay the same, elsewhere in the circuit. That's what equivalent circuit means. So when you say you're replacing a voltage source by an equivalent current source, for example, you're not saying that this thing is the same as this thing. It can't be. After all, here you have two different voltage drops, one always V0, another IR0, where you have current flowing through two branches, one flowing like this, the other being diverted here. So inside this, things are different. When I say equivalent circuit, I mean when you replace this by this, voltages and currents everywhere else stay the same. And that is the important meaning of the word equivalent circuit. This is very important because we are going to use equivalent circuits in a big way throughout the course. And you have to understand exactly what you mean when you say something is equivalent to that. You don't mean that they are exactly the same, of course. At least the part which is being replaced has definitely changed. But the rest of it should not change. That's the basic idea. So I'm sure all of you had this notion, but this precise notion of the rest of the circuit not changing in current and voltage, that is what is going to be very important. Okay. Now, one point, many of you wrote things in the chat box, but you should also know that the moment I get disconnected, I lose my earlier chats. So whatever chats were there in the first hour, I have lost all of them. I can only see right now the last few chats, which essentially says, okay, Shomakant Shah, same current voltage relations. Yeah, the same current voltage relations elsewhere. Elsewhere is important. Okay, so there were some chat messages before, which I don't remember. And I think, yeah, how do we replace non-ideal potential current sources if we want to switch off all potential sources? Simple. Am I still here? I am still here, right?
Yes, sir.
I am getting a message which says you lost your connection. Yeah, I did lose that. Okay, sorry. So I got cut off for quite some time this time. I hope I'm back.
Yes, sir, we can hear you.
Okay. I don't even realize where I was when I got cut off. So what was the last thing I said?
You were replying to a question.
Sir, Arikta had asked a question on the chat.
So I think I definitely missed all the. I don't have access to the previous chat messages. So okay, how do we replace non-ideal potential current sources if you want to switch off all potential sources? Okay, that was a. Okay, so two people have. That was Arikta's question. Shoma has also helped me out by copying that. Well, with non-ideal potential current sources, that's pretty easy. If you want to switch off all potential sources, you just switch them off. That is okay, but that's a bit trivial. What you really want to say is, for theoretical calculations, when you want to switch off a voltage source, then you make V0 equal to 0. Of course, if you make V0 equal to 0, in a circuit, what happens is you replace this by a short. So basically, the source gets replaced by its internal impedance. With an ideal source, it gets replaced by a source. If it's a non-ideal source, it gets replaced by its internal impedance. Because if you put a short here, you get to see R0 in R0 across these two terminals. For a current source, similar idea. This is a real current source, non-ideal current source. You want to switch it off, you need to make the current 0. If you make the current 0, you replace it by Y0 across the two ends. Of course, if it were an ideal source, then Y0 would be 0. The Y0 equal to 0 actually means an open circuit, no current flowing. So then it would simply mean an open circuit. So an ideal current source gets replaced by an open circuit, just a gap. An ideal voltage source gets replaced by a short circuit, just a wire. A real voltage source gets replaced by a resistance, its internal resistance, and a real current source gets replaced by its internal admittance. That's it. Oh, somebody's pointing out that my screen is not visible. Okay, good. I think I lost that last time. Okay, so let me just repeat what I said right now. This was your real voltage source. You want to switch it off. Switching off a voltage source simply means replacing the voltage source V0 by 0. 0 volts means you put a short. You just connect it with a wire. So basically, when you want to switch off a non-ideal voltage source, it gets replaced by just the R0. R0 and a short. So of course, if you had an ideal source, it will just mean replace this with a wire. For non-ideal source, it's replace it with its internal impedance. So for a current source, let's just take a look at this. I've already said this, but let me repeat this with the screen on. For a current source, you have this. This is a real current source. Some current source, ideal current source I0 in parallel with an admittance Y0. If you want to switch off the current source, this goes away. So you are left with, that means there's no current in this branch, you can ignore it. So you just get Y0. So a non-ideal current source gets replaced by its admittance. Of course, if it were an ideal scenario, then admittance would be 0. And 0 admittance simply means open circuit. Nothing connected between the two ends. Does that answer the question? Or Hector, that was your question. Is this answered here? Okay. I think I saw a question about third problem in the question sheet. There were several people asked me questions on that, and then I opened the discussion forum, and I should have done that at the very beginning. And a question on that was asked there, so I answered there. Okay, I would request all of you, if you have a question, instead of mailing me, it would be better if you wrote it on the discussion forum, for the simple reason, then everybody would be able to see the question and the answer. By the way, I'm not the only one who is allowed to answer there. If you have an answer to a question which has been asked, please answer. You can. There's a discussion forum. You can discuss. Okay, the discussion forum is on Wheeler. It's at the top of the page. You will have a question asked there rather than mail me, for the simple reason that then the answer would be question and the answer would be visible to everybody, and everybody may be able to benefit from that. Okay, so my answering individual questions, that would be better. And of course, everybody is free to answer them. If I find somebody's answer not so correct, I'm going to either remove that or at least say why it's not correct. It might happen, but there's nothing wrong with that. Discussion, of course, can occur only if you make mistakes sometimes. So that's fine. That's fine. Okay, Anurit is asking, there we have to use the concept of supernode. I'm not very sure what a supernode is. I'm guessing what a supernode is from what you're asking, but I'm not aware of the term. Okay, it may be a term which is used in some book. I hope I did not use the term myself and I have forgotten. So this was the question, right? Okay, so here the important point is you are supposed to use, this is a Norton's method application, right? And in Norton's method, you are supposed to replace all the voltage sources by current sources at the beginning. And why do you need to do that? Simply because you have no clue about how much current will flow through a voltage source, but you need that in order to write down Norton's equations. Okay, so let's see. Let me do one. Let me move this to one side. So when you say super, there are 4 nodes in the picture, although you can see only 3 of them labeled. This is one of them. This is another. This is another. The 4th node is this one, which has been connected to the ground. So we have taken V4 to be 0. By the way, this is something which is very important. The ground in an electronic circuit, exactly what does it mean? That depends on your application. Sometimes when you're dealing with high voltage circuits or circuits which are actually connected to the mains, the ground really means it has to be connected to the building ground or your wiring ground. Essentially, because of safety, you don't want to get a nasty shock. But in circuits like this, the ground really is notional. It just is the notion that this is the point I'm going to take, whose voltage I'm going to take to be 0. Remember, voltages don't matter, voltage differences do. So which voltage you take to be 0 is arbitrary. It's just something which makes life easier if you choose one voltage to be 0, so that instead of having to worry about 4 voltages, V1, V2, V3, and V4, you just have to worry about 1 or 3 of them. So here we have marked that as a ground, so that means we have chosen that to be 0. Okay. Now, the problem with this circuit, and this was a deliberately difficult problem compared to the other 2. The problem is simply this: you cannot carry out Norton's procedure fully here, simply because you cannot get rid of this voltage source. Why not? We just learned how to get rid of a voltage source and bring in a current source in it. But remember, the formula that we had there was I0 is V0 by R0 and Y0 is 1 by R0. That's the connection that allows you to replace the voltage source by an equivalent current source. The trouble is this voltage source has no series resistance. This is an ideal voltage source. An ideal voltage source cannot be replaced by equivalent current source simply because an R0 of 0 would make both of these equations meaningless. Okay. Right? So the initial procedure that you have to take into account, getting rid of voltage sources, bringing in current sources, cannot be carried out here. So the first part of the procedure fails. But that doesn't mean that you cannot use Norton's method. It just means that you cannot use Norton's method as it is written. Okay. So what can you do? You can do one thing very easily. You can write down Norton's equivalent for this. This equation will simply be V3 into all. Remember, the rule is for this node, it's this node's voltage multiplied by the sum of all the admittances from this node. So 1 by 2 plus 1 by 6. That's the current flowing out, okay, of this node. But minus, that's actually not right, because the current flowing to this actually is not V3 by 2, it's V3 minus V2 by 2. That's very important to remember. Frankly, most people get Ohm's law wrong sometime in their life or the other. It's a very simple law, but well, almost certainly everybody has got it wrong sometime or the other, simply because they keep on forgetting that Ohm's law is voltage difference by resistance, not voltage by resistance. The current flowing out through this wire is not V3 by 2, it's V3 minus V2 by 2. Similarly, this one is V3 minus V1 by 6, but that's easily taken into account in the procedure. It's V2 by 2. And these are all currents flowing out, so that's equal to plus 1 by 10, plus 10 amperes going in. Because that's Norton's equation for this node. This was easy to write down. The moment you try writing down the Norton equation for this node, you run in trouble, because you know how much current is flowing through this, you know how much current is flowing through this branch. You do not know how much current is flowing through this branch, simply because the 16-volt ideal source can carry any current whatsoever. Okay. Of course, it doesn't carry an arbitrary current. The current it does carry depends on the circuit. But just from the fact that it's a 16-volt source, you have no way of knowing how much current flows through it. So you cannot write down the nodal equation for this node. Same here, you cannot write down the nodal equation for this node as well. Okay? Yeah? So these two nodal equations you simply cannot write down. So what happens then? Well, either you can give up Norton's method completely, going for something else, or, and this is important, this is what you can do here, is simply this. You cannot write down the Norton equations directly from this and this node, but what you can do is you can immediately write down one result, which is actually much simpler, which is V2 minus V1. How much is that? How much is V2 minus V1? 16 volts. I'm just not writing the volts here, just V2 minus V1 is 16. That's one equation. Right, so you have three unknowns, V1, V2, V3. You have written down two equations. You need one more. And that's where I guess the super node comes in. The super node basically is, I'm not really aware of the term, but if you take these two nodes together, then you get what I'm guessing has been called a super node there. Why can you take two nodes together? Because remember, the basic idea behind using Norton's method basically is this. Net current flowing into a node has to be 0, or net current flowing out has to be 0, right? That's just charge conservation. But that works not only for one node, that works for two nodes as well. If you take this whole region comprising of V1, V2 with the voltage source in between. Whatever current flows into this has to flow out of this, right? So what you could do is, instead of using this node separately, for which you can't write down the equation, or this node separately for which you can't write down the equation, you can write the current flowing out of these two nodes together, which will work out fine. By the way, you might say, then what happens to the current through this? Because that's still there. But note that if you're taking these two nodes together, then the current flowing out of V2 through this and the current outflowing out of V1 through this are exactly equal and opposite. So they will just cancel out. It's just like not having to worry about internal forces. Here is internal current. They will just cancel out. So you could, of course, if you don't like the concept of a supernode, I'm just borrowing the term. I'm assuming that's what a supernode means. But if you don't like that concept, you could simply say something like this. V2 by, let's try to write down this equation first for the node V2. It will be V2 into 1 by 3 plus 1 by 2, okay, minus V3 by 2, minus V4 by 3, but that's something I don't know. That's something I don't need because V4 is 0. Sorry, V4 by 3 is simply 0, so I don't need that. But that's not all. Then you need the current through this, which you don't know. Okay, you don't know it. So write that down as I don't know it, so I just write it as Ix. That's the current flowing out to this. Okay. So that's the equation for V2. What equation can I write down for V1? 1 by 4 plus 1 by 6 minus V3 by 6 minus V4 by 4, but V4 is 0. So again, I don't need that. And the current through this. Right? How much is the current through this now? Okay, so I shouldn't have written this as Ix. Ix is already in this picture. So let's write this as IV. The current through the voltage source. This current, let's call that IV. How much is this current? One node is equivalent to general node or non-reference node. Okay. Okay, so that's good. Thanks for telling me that. I didn't really know that. The IV is okay. So Ritu, that's got the is that Ritu, right? My eyesight is short a bit. Okay. Thanks for that information. I didn't really know that term. But anyway, as people have pointed out, this current here is actually minus IV. Right? This is IV is the current flowing from V2 to V1. Here we are talking of the current flowing from V1 to V2. That's just minus IV. So that's equal to 0. So if I wrote down the current, the Norton equations for the two nodes separately, the problem would be I have to deal with this IV, which I don't know. But notice that in one of them I'm getting IV, the other I'm getting minus IV. So if you just add the two equations together, I've got rid of the IV. Right? So I get V2 into 1/3 plus half plus V1 into 1/4 plus 1/6 minus V3 into 1/6 plus half equals 0. And that I guess would be exactly what you would call the supernode. If you take these two things, this general region together as a single node and try to use current flowing in equal to current flowing out, or net current flowing in is 0, you would actually get this equation V2 into 1/3 plus half, V2 into 1/3 plus half from this, V1 into 1/4 plus 1/6 from this, minus V3 by 2 from this, minus V3 by 6 from this equals 0. So directly write down that equation. So using this supernode concept, that is, you taking V2 and V1 together, you can directly write down the sum of this and this without the IV, of course. IV is 0. So that will be your third equation. Now you have three equations you solve. It is you have three unknowns, you need three equations, you can solve. Okay. Is that clear to everybody? Okay, so now let me also point out one thing. For this particular equation, maybe tagging this point as the ground is a bit unfair, in the sense that ultimately your physical results will not depend on your choice of ground. It should be the same no matter which point you choose as ground. So it might even be much neater if you took V1, say took this point V1, this to be the ground, because if you did that, V2 would be simply 16 volts immediately, right? And then you would have two unknowns to worry about, V3 and V4, right? Clear? So those of you who have done this using the super node, using the ground as indicated, just try solving this problem, putting the ground here. If V1 is 0, V2 is 16 volts, you just have two unknowns left, V3, but now V4, which we did not worry about before because we had taken that to be 0, that is now non-zero. So you worry about V4 and V3. But now note that writing down the equations for V4 and V3 using Norton's is trivial. What made this problem difficult was that we had already indicated that the ground would be there at V4. But it doesn't have to be. And ultimately, even if you use this convention, the physical quantities, which are the voltage differences and the currents, they will come out the same. And this will work out with much less effort because you just have two unknowns to worry about. For example, the equation for V3 now will be V3 into half plus 1/6. There will be no minus V1 by 6 because V1 is 0. Okay. There will be a minus 16 by 2. 16 volts here. 2 ohms current, 2 ohms resistance equals 10. So that will tell you what V3 is. Immediate. This V3, of course, is going to be different from the V3 you calculated before, because the V3 you calculated before was voltage of this point with respect to this point. This V3 is the voltage of this point with respect to this one. Okay, so this is a different V3, but you will be able to calculate it easily. You will also be able to calculate V4 easily. Simple equation. Once again, I'm not even going to bother to write it down. You should do some of the work. So that would give you the answer with almost no work at all compared to this one. Okay. Then if you choose this to be 0 and this to be 16 volts, that's no longer a choice. The moment you choose this to be 0, this at 16 volts becomes automatic. Then the calculation becomes absolutely trivial. There's hardly anything to do there. Okay. So this problem becomes very, very simple if you just change your point of view a bit. That was the other reason why I gave this problem, to check whether somebody caught on to that. Okay. Note that just because that point has been indicated as a ground doesn't mean that you have to use that as a ground. Of course, in your final answer, when I ask how much is V1, you have to quote it with respect to V4. But if you find out what V4 is, with V1 equal to 0, then finding out what V1 will be when V4 is 0 is trivial. That's just a trivial amount of shifting that you will have to do at the end. But the calculation will become a lot easier. Okay. So this one problem actually can teach you many things. It can teach you the concept, how to go beyond the standard Norton method, either or it can even teach you the concept of supernode, a term which I did not know, but what I really use in the calculation anyway. And finally, it can also teach you this issue that you can look at the same problem in different ways and get a much, much easier way of answering the question. Okay? Yeah? Okay. Now, I think we have discussed the problems and the stuff that we had in the lectures quite enough. I need to talk about one more thing, but that's something which many of you, at least most of you who have gone through our second year coursework, in fact, you have gone through it very recently because of the pandemic. Of course, the computer course took place in the summer. So you definitely have seen NumPy and SciPy. The reason why I bring this up is, as was asked by several people in the mail separately, do you really have to solve all these horrible equations that you're getting by hand? The answer is no. The answer is I would definitely appreciate it if you, I would like you to do this. If you get a horrible equation to solve, don't solve it by hand. Use numerical methods which you have already learned in the last semester. After all, that's why you learned it in the last semester. You learned it because it's useful. Okay? And you have to use it. Now, of course, if you have an equation like v/4 equals 2 and you use a computer to solve it, that is horrible. Or if you get something like a plus b equals 3 and a minus b equal to 1 and you need a computer to solve it, that's horrible. But if you have 7.2a minus 3.6b equals 2.4 and 1.5a plus 16b equals something, I don't really want you to spend a lot of time trying to solve it by hand. Just fire up your computer, or by the way, or your phone, because your phone, at least if you have a smartphone, which I'm pretty sure most of you do, you should be able to run Python, NumPy, SciPy perfectly well on it. Okay? You don't even need a laptop for this. The phone is good enough. So you can run this on your phone, on your laptop, and just find out the answer. All I'm asking from you is you should give me a screenshot of what you have done on your computer. Can we even use these packages in exam? Depends. If it's online, yes. If it's offline, no, because you will not have access to those packages. So we don't know whether it will be online, offline yet, right? Because there is a chance that by the time your INSEM exam comes around, you may have to give, you may be able to come to campus. At least we are hoping for that. Well, no guarantees, of course. But then, if your exam is supposed to be offline where you cannot use these packages, we will set questions where you will not need to use these packages. Okay? But if it is going to be online, I see no reason why you cannot use these packages. You should, in fact, I would definitely encourage you to use them. That gives you more practice in learning about these useful things that you've learned about. We don't teach computational methods simply because you want to learn computers. We teach computational methods because we want you to learn physics. That's it. At least in DPS we do. In other subjects, they teach you computers because they want you to learn their subjects. For us, computers are not a be-all and end-all. It's primarily something that you use. Don't use it in your final exam for the simple reason that in your final exam, if your final exam is offline, simply because you will not have access to your computer then, or your phone. It's just for the benefit of those of you who have, I know that there are a few students here, especially the IP students. Have you studied this thing already? I don't think you have. I don't know what your composition is right now. You may come from different universities, so it's a bit non-uniform. But I'm pretty sure all of you have had access to some kind of computing by now, no matter which university you come from. So I will just illustrate quickly. Say, how would you solve an equation like the one I wrote down a while ago? So I'm just using the Python interpreter here. You can use other techniques, but I would say using Python would be better, because that way you will also have practice in other courses where you will also use Python. So there's something which is old hat for all of you who have done the course just last semester. So you import NumPy, you put these things. Now you can use many different techniques or many different modules here, but I'm just using the NumPy module. Let's say this equation. You want to use it. I will just need to produce a matrix, or if I'm using NumPy, I'm not even going to use a matrix version of NumPy, which I could. I would just put this in a NumPy array, which is 7.2. So that gives me the array of the coefficients, which looks like a matrix. It's actually different from a matrix, but it looks and walks and talks like a matrix. And B is equal to another NumPy array, with just the coefficients 2.4 and 76. Okay, after I've done that, so now I want a response from the people who have already done the NumPy SciPy Python course last semester. How would I solve the equation AX equal to B then? If I have these two arrays, A and B. Okay, the easiest way would be just to use the result that there is a solve function in the linealge module, the linear algebra module in NumPy. Okay, and it seems many of you have already learned this. There are various ways, by the way. You can actually invert the matrix and then multiply that by B. But the easiest way would be simply to use the this is not the only way, there are other ways. And that tells you what the two values are going to be. A and B are 2.587 and 4.5 respectively. Okay. Well, actually, you don't need the print, simply because if you're using the interpreter, then the interpreter anyway displays the output to you. If you're using something else, if you're writing a program for this is too simple to write a program. So that's why you don't need the print. Print, of course, will work. I put a print. If you put a print, then you will just see the elements and not the array itself, array statement, but it's equivalent. You get to know what is happening. So all I'm saying is, if you get horrible equations to solve, like these ones, don't waste your time solving them by hand. You have better things to do. Just use a computer, and this one works fine. And this actually gives you practice using things that you will need to use. So then linear algebra module also has the invert, that you can actually invert the matrix and solve for it and so on. But there are many ways. This is not the only way, but this is one very easy way. Just ask the linear algebra submodule solve function to give you the solution. The only thing you have to remember is to import NumPy first and then define the arrays properly. I'm pretty sure everybody, even those of you who have not done this before, should be able to recognize that all you're doing is putting 7.2 minus 3.6, the first two elements, inside a list. So square bracket is essential. Then 1.5, 1.6 inside another list, 1.5, 16 in another list, and putting them both inside a bigger list. So this is really a list of lists which contains the rows, but then you are using the array function to convert that thing into an array, a NumPy object, whose details, of course, are very, very important if you want to keep on using this over and over again. But even without that, this is very important. So the array, and B is simply a flat array with two elements, 2.4 and 76, and that's it. So this is as simple as it gets, and this is what you really should be using. By the way, you should not be using NumPy to solve for the currents in the last question, in the third question, the so-called difficult question, simply because there the equations are really simple enough to be solved by hand. And by the way, if you wrote it like this, it should be trivial to solve. Almost, you can almost do it without any effort whatsoever if you use V1 equal to 0. Okay, so are there any further questions? It seems not. Then I will call it a day today and meet you again on Thursday. There will be no classes on Tuesday, simply because we will have only 2 classes, Monday and Thursday. If there's a holiday on Monday for some reason or Thursday, then we will switch to a Tuesday class. Okay, but you will get another video soon and also another problem set to work out. By the way, 3 problems to solve in 3 days. I guess that's okay, right?
Yes, sir.
Lecture 2 is also available. Of course, lecture 2 is available. That's why I'm saying another lecture. Lecture 1 and lecture 2, in fact, most of the things we discussed today essentially is from lecture 2. So I'm sure some people have watched lecture 2, not all of you. But all these things that we discussed about the Thevenin theorem and Norton theorem were lecture 2. Although equivalence between voltage and current sources you needed in lecture 1 as well, because we needed, but it becomes even clearer once you read that in conjunction with Thevenin and Norton's theorem. Okay, so bye for today. You may stop the recording.